from the Organisation for Responsible Businesses. I'm sorry, was it Jack? That mentioned SMEs, the fact that you want to use them, but the challenges in terms of using them. Can I hear a bit more about the panel's views on how you should engage in SMEs? How you can resolve that problem?
Okay, so we can better engage with SMEs. Who would like to tackle that initially?
Shall I start to raise the subject? SMEs, traditionally SMEs dealt direct with government, and then over the past 20 years it ends up being subcontractors to much larger suppliers. The secret to engage more with SMEs is to either let smaller contracts or to divide the contracts into lots. They could be geographical or specialism, so you're dealing direct with the experts, in the locality or in the subject. So you're not going through middlemen. And of course we're paying to use those middlemen, so we can achieve savings at the same time.
Okay. Nigel, do you want to?
Yeah, this is something that's kind of wrecked me for the time I've been at Birmingham City Council, which is a touch over 2 years, because I talk to our politicians and they want us to use local suppliers, in particular the ones in their wards. And they also want me to deliver massive savings by bulking all the spend together, but not the spend that affects the suppliers in their wards. So there's an absolute dilemma in how you do that. The way we've really tackled it in Birmingham is by three things, really. To a large extent, and it's probably not the right thing to say, but sometimes I wouldn't actually wish small SMEs to have to go through the processes required to win a big contract at a council, because the bureaucracy associated with that is just burdensome for anybody, and particularly for them. So we've pushed them down three particular channels. One, we point out where we publish all our contract awards, so they can see who our suppliers are, our first tier suppliers, and they have an opportunity to bid for that work. The second and most successful way is really through the portal that we launched here a year ago called Find It in Birmingham, finditInBirmingham.com, and that's where all the supply opportunities that the city has, other public sector organisations in the city are suppliers, and anyone who wants to post one can post an opportunity. They're typically, by volume, below EU threshold, so smaller than £150,000. So yes, we have to demonstrate best value, people have to tender, but they don't have to go through all the stuff that's associated with that. And feedback from SMEs at some of the Find It in Birmingham breakfast events does indicate that it's a better way for them to access council opportunities than bidding against the big suppliers who they're going to really struggle to compete with.
There's a multiplier that's been quoted to me from local authorities of 1.8 in terms of if you're spending money with a local supplier. Is that something that can be built into the tender processes?
I've heard on a social return on investment multiplier. I'm not sure if that's the same thing that looks at the levels of local spend. If you spend £1 million, how much of that is spent locally with first tier, second tier, third tier? We haven't yet applied that. We are looking at how we can apply that. But we do other things like jobs. We've got this framework for jobs and skills, so we apply the clauses from that in particular contracts. We'll try to be as creative as we can, at the same time trying to balance the need to spend as little as possible.
So Simon, as a supplier, I mean, obviously Pitney Bowes is not an SME, but what's your take on the tendering process at the moment, how things are changing? Is it becoming harder, easier to do business with government?
Well, I did smile when you talk about SMEs, because obviously we're not an SME, so, and as long as it's fair and equitable, that's all we can ask for when you're running a tender process. And I think to break it down to lots is what we're seeing more and more from the energy notices that are coming out. That will give more opportunity for a more diverse response, I suppose, from SMEs. Whether you're going to get a better price or economies of scale from an SME compared to a large organisation that can, I suppose, like you can, exercise your weight in procurement, is something that you'll need to weigh up as part of the tender evaluation. Obviously, everything's not down to price only, but at the minute, a large proportion of what we're seeing is cost-based as a large scoring mechanism. But as long as it's fair and equitable, we can't complain or anything like that.
Okay. Any other feedback on that particular question around SMEs, Eddie?
Yeah, I think one of the big issues with it is we've got to get away from this mentality of frameworks, and those frameworks that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which are not being divided into lots, as Jack suggests, and not being regionalised or whatever. They are becoming monstrosities where only the biggest of the big can be in there. And the bigger drive towards that is going to punish SMEs. And, I come back to the politicians slightly at the moment. On one hand, it's make savings, which means you need to be cutting costs and contracts, which means you need to be putting bigger contracts out to achieve savings. And on the other hand, it's help SMEs, but actually just put these big contracts out, and it doesn't go. We've got a provision in the directives and in the regulations that isn't used in this country, which is called small loss provision, which allows organisations to take up to 20% of the value of a contract and break it into smaller value lots to allow small businesses to win part of the business, and then the larger 80% goes out as a main contract. Is it used? Is it? What? No. Actually, you're actively encouraged as public bodies not to use it because the usual excuse, but you'd have to manage different contracts. So you can't have everything. You've got to decide what way it has to go, and that's something that ultimately from the top has got to come down. But at the moment, the push is for larger contracts, more collaborative procurement, more joint services, more joint ventures, more framework contracts. That's what's excluding the SMEs.
Ken, please.
I think this comes down to fundamentally getting and understanding the psyche of a small and medium enterprise. In a nutshell, the people that write the rules and the people that actually come up with all the pre-qualification documentation, the tendering documentation, God knows what else, which is nothing more than a glorified tick box exercise for many organisations, don't understand business. I have to be honest with you, I'm a director and have been out in small business for the last 10 years. And we're very selective from the organisation. I thought we need to do this and do that. You want to bid for it and things like that. And I said, I'm not interested. They go, why not? It's got your name written on it. Too risky. I can't, and we can't dedicate as a team people the time and the effort to go through all these hoops and hurdles for a £20,000 contract. It's not worth it. And they get very upset with you then. And realistically, the whole thing from the EU directives top down has been written by people who are more interested in process than interested in outputs. And I think we really need to be slightly controversial, a revolution in this country about the whole way we tackle and view small and medium enterprises and the business ethic which they actually will bring. SMEs do bring a lot to the party, and my public sector and chunks of the private sector, including the big guys, they learn a lot from the way SMEs run their businesses.
Very well said. I think a lot of support for that in the audience. I guess one of the most recent success stories in terms of the private sector and opening up contract opportunities has been Compete For, in respect of Olympic opportunities, and providing a lot more transparency throughout the supply chain of where these opportunities are. And perhaps it's unrealistic to expect an SME to be able to bid for a contract worth tens or hundreds of millions. But what else can we do to actually open up the supply chain and increase that transparency so that SMEs can actually become established on the ladder, at least on some level, even if they're not the prime contractor? Any views on that?
Well, I think what you might start seeing is more and more partnering with larger organisations, partnering with SMEs as a means for both entities winning the business and sharing a part of the government spend on contract awards. The age you notice, I smiled as well, because from a supplier's perspective, it's a real headache to complete all the loops and hurdles that you have to go through to actually submit bid on time and on budget, because it's very costly for an organisation to actually put one of these together. So I can understand why an SME would sort of say it's not worth it. So that's why I think we might start seeing more partnerships.
Well, I'd agree. I think the opportunity for partnerships and consortia is strong. I can't emphasise enough the need, I think, for SME suppliers to consider the supply chains.
Yeah.
The only restrictions on what a private company go through are the processes they have, and one would hope there's a good procurement process that takes place. But they can win business within weeks instead of the months that it takes or currently takes under the EU process. So it's not always something that SMEs want to hear. They want to supply the council, they want to supply public sector, and we want a proportion of SMEs as well. But it comes at a cost and it comes at a risk. So I really encourage people to go for the lower value, below threshold contracts, or go through our supply chain, or take the risk of the OGIN.
Okay, thank you. Nigel, he wants to... Sorry, David.
I think picking up on one of the points that was mentioned earlier about Compete For, I don't know how many people actually have used it or understand it, but actually the philosophy behind it, because we were one of the early adopters, was to try and enable more SMEs to do business with us. And in fact, we statistically proved that the amount of business going to SMEs, because we made the process a lot simpler and a lot easier for SMEs to actually engage with Westminster City Council by doing a pre-qualification once, not every time you went to tender, by taking some of the layers of bureaucracy out, actually made it far more attractive for SMEs to do business. And also, if you think about it from the point of view of an SME looking for business or looking for opportunities, if they are brought to his door via email to say there's an opportunity that fits the criteria of your business, you don't have to spend that time going looking for the opportunity. It will come to you through the system. So there are different ways in which that can be done. And I think, to echo some of the other points that have been made, we were very keen to encourage larger organisations to develop supply chains that had local SME businesses in them, so to try and deal with the usual problems that I'm sure we all face, which is Cabinet members want local businesses to win local business, so there is a way of doing that. We're very objective about saying there is a process to go through. If you want to be part and parcel of that tender, or you want to be part and parcel of that business, then you have to register and you have to be part and parcel of the same objective, transparent process as everybody else. It's not a fudge, it's a unified process that everybody has to adopt. But I think that fairness is important for all businesses to recognise. And interestingly enough, we found that when we adopted some of the more, if you like, simplified and less bureaucratic processes, and we started to be more objective and transparent about how we bid the work, oddly enough, some of the people that have been supplying Westminster for literally decades suddenly found then that because their prices were way off the mark and actually suddenly weren't getting any more business anymore, they wondered why. And we said, well, actually, there's a business opportunity for you here, which is to help, if you like, make your business get fitter and more adept at being able to take these opportunities. Don't see it as a challenge or a threat, but see it as an opportunity to improve your business. And so we had to engage with the SME market and spend time to do that. It is not a one-stop solution. There isn't a panacea. It would be through lots of different avenues and methods by which you can engage SMEs. And it doesn't mean to say they have to be done directly. Sometimes the most efficient ways are actually to facilitate them through supply chains, but make those supply chains very flat. So in other words, you don't introduce layers and layers and layers. When we did a specific case study on looking at building reactive maintenance, BRM, we found that there were probably something like 5 or 6 layers to the actual person that was physically carrying out the work as a piece of repair work. And what we felt was that that was totally unacceptable, and also layered in cost on cost on cost. It was costing the public purse. And so our view was quite simple, which is we need to find direct access to those SMEs. Now, we may not have come up with the best solution, but actually we cut through 4 layers of contracting. So therefore we took out that cost, we put in one simple help desk, and we had a rotation of micro businesses. So let's be clear, these were micro businesses, in other words less than 5 employees, that were physically doing the work of the locksmiths, the glaziers, repairing a bit of this, doing something like that. And that actually, for us, meant that we'd actually generated economic activity in the marketplace, but also satisfied all the rules and regulations, and indeed taken cost out at the same time. For us, that was about saying, let's try and figure a different way of doing this, but taking bureaucracy out. And the same would be true for a large tender that we if we're putting people to all this cost, in other words, in some cases, price and way rival a 7-figure sum to carry a competitive dialogue, guess what? The contractor is going to want that back through his profit on the bid. So guess who's the loser? It's only the public purse that becomes the loser. So the challenge is very much around your teams to make sure that you can refine and hone that process to take bureaucracy, to take costs out, and to optimise the process so that those costs aren't being passed back into the public